Hello everyone, my name is Han. My presentation is about separating the roles of orthographic and semantic information in the neural correlates of evidence accumulation for lexical decision making. As you might know, that decision making is about selecting among several alternatives. One prevalent account for the decision making process is the drift diffusion model. The model consists that decisions were made through evidence accumulation. When the evidence accumulates across time until it reaches a decision boundary, and therefore a decision is made. There are several sources of this sensory evidence, including the virtual attention and inhibitory control. However, most studies focused on a single source, where the brain can actually integrate multiple sources of sensory evidence across time in this accumulation process. To better reflect how these different sources are interplaying with each other, the lexical decision task provides an ideal tool to separate multiple sources or sub-processes, such as virtual word recognition, virtual attention, cognitive control, and semantic processing. Indeed, there are several studies have shown the correlates of DDM parameters with the lexical decision making. One study have shown that as the proportion of words increased, the starting point moved towards the word boundary and against the non-word boundary. In another relevant study, the drift rate was found to be varying across different word types, including high-frequency words, low-frequency words, pseudo-word, and random letters. These different word types continuously vary in their word likelihoods, and it has been found that the drift rate was also systematically tuned by word likelihoods. However, there are several limitations of the existing study. So, firstly, the definition of word likelihoods is pretty rough, and it couldn't reveal quantitatively of the relationship between drift rate and subjective word likelihoods. Secondly, the lack of measurements inside the brain, which according to electrophysiological support evidence, the different cognitive process can be reflected in different ERP components. For example, the M200 latency was reported to be correlated with the onset of the decision making. To better separate these different sources or informations, the Chinese characters appears to our horizon, and it seems to be they are very good at distinguishing different informations. Typically, in the experiment with 4 different word types, including the real words, which has semantic meaning, semantic information, and they are pronounceable, and also pseudo words, which doesn't contain semantics and is not pronounceable. And they follow the orthographic rule of a Chinese character. And the fourth word, they are not pronounceable and they have no semantics, and also their orthographic position are not legal in the system, and also stroke combinations, which has no radicals at all. So by comparing 2 of the word types, we obtain the different levels of Chinese word lexical decision making. And in a lexical decision making task, the words or the items are presented, where the participants has to indicate whether the current item is a word or not. Using this design, we are curious about these different research questions. First, how does the evidence accumulation change across the orthographic characteristics in the lexical decision task in Chinese, and does it differ across the language system? And secondly, how prior knowledge, including subjective word likeness and familiarity, influence the evidence accumulation for each word type. And lastly, does the ERP components, including the N1, which reflects the orthographic processing, and N400, which reflects the semantic processing during the lexical decision task, and whether they contributed to the evidence accumulation model. With these questions, we recruited 34 adult native speakers, and the EEG activity was recorded while the lexical decision task was made. After the lexical decision task, they had several poster tests, which includes the subjective rating with a 10-point likely scale, and including the familiarity of the item, the confidence of the decision making, and as well as the word likeness of the current item. We also measure the word naming test to reflect the word naming ability of each participant. And in this study, we focused on the N1 component, the P200, P3, and N400 in this study to explore the sub-processes during the lexical decision making. And we fit the data to the DDM. So in the first model, the model based on purely the behavior data, where the responses were accuracy coded, and the drift rates were extracted for each item using the MCMC to estimate the posterior distribution of the model parameters. And in another model, or in other models, we include the subsets of two word types separately using the single child ERP components as the regressor. And in data set 1, we explore whether the lexical level could affect the evidence accumulation, and in the data set 2, the orthographic level, and data 3, the radical level. And the DIC value were used to compare the performance of the models. So in the first part of the behavioral result, we found that the pseudo-words shows the poorest performance compared to words and false words and stroke combinations. And with purely the behavior, the drift rate for pseudo-words were the lowest, while for this false word and stroke combination, they are the highest compared to real words. And the subjective ratings across the word types have shown that the participants were more confident with the words and false words and stroke combination compared to the pseudo words. And on familiarity and the word likeness, the words have achieved the highest score because they are words, and the pseudo words show the highest variability, where for false word and stroke combinations, they are less familiar and they doesn't look like a word. To explore the correlation between the drift rate and the subjective rating, we found that the drift rates during this lexical decision making correlates positively with the familiarity score and word likeness score, but only for words. And the pattern was reversed for pseudo words. This has shown that the familiarity and the word likeness speed up the evidence accumulation on words, but it slowed down the evidence accumulation for pseudo words. And comparing to the model without the ERP as a regressor, the models with the ERP components seems to be providing a better fit. This is especially the case when pseudo words, when in the data sets including pseudo words and false characters, which are showing how the orthographic level of processing are affecting the evidence accumulation. and the N1 components, which is reflecting the orthographic processing, and the N400 components, which reflects the semantic processing, are especially contributing to the feat of the orthographic level of processing. However, in the dataset, which includes false words and stroke combinations, none of the ERP components are contributing to the feat of the model. With these findings, here are our conclusions. The drift rate of the evidence accumulation varies in different levels of word visual word recognition in Chinese. This is consistent with that of the result of alphabetic language. And secondly, the subjective degree of familiarity and word likeness can speed up the evidence accumulation for words, but it slows down the evidence accumulation for pseudo-words. And lastly, the ERP components contribute to the feat of the DDM in differentiating word items in lexical and orthographic level, and the N1 and N400 are especially contributors of the orthographic processing. Okay, thank you for your attention. So that's all of my presentation. And if you are interested in this topic, or if you have any questions about the current presentation, feel free to drop by during the event. Thank you very much.